2020 began like any other year. And I'm not just talking about that weird overt optimism the new year evokes in some people, despite those people having no real data or intention to make the lifestyle changes that would indicate the new year will somehow be better than the last. What I mean by 2020 beginning like any other year is the usual San Francisco crowds I would reluctantly immerse myself into because it was normal for me to run in-person errands and it was normal for public spaces to be crowded. If you're lucky enough to see your favorite team in person punch its ticket to the Super Bowl, it will probably be the peak of your year. That was definitely the case for me. I rushed home to pull the all-nighter I needed to get the game day vlog up by the next day. Guess what happens when you combine a weekend of being in crowds with the immune system suppression of poor sleep? That's right.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with... Yuck!
A couple of days after the game, I unsurprisingly woke up with a sore throat, poetically at the same time as an important national news story. This is when things start seeming a little off.
Tonight, the CDC says the infected passenger passed through busy SeaTac Airport in Seattle, the first confirmed U.S. case of the contagious coronavirus now in Washington state.
My own illness got progressively worse throughout the week until the point where pain meds were no longer managing the pain, which was particularly alarming considering my somewhat high pain tolerance. On the morning of January 26th, I was convinced I had strep throat, so I wandered to a clinic in my neighborhood to seek urgent care, since the place I usually seek medical care is closed on weekends. The clinic in my neighborhood said it was out of network for my health insurance, because American healthcare system. So I took an Uber across town to the hospital named after Mr. Facebook. As we were getting onto the freeway, my so far pretty chatty Uber driver appeared to be looking at his GPS, but then turned to look at me as I sat in the back seat and said, "Kobe Bryant died." I thought he was maybe joking, so my brain instinctively gave that statement a 30% chance of being true. Then the Uber driver said it was a helicopter crash, and that 30% shot up to about 85%. Because I thought, a helicopter accident sounds like exactly the way a celebrity would die before his time if it's not from a drug overdose. After the Uber dropped me off at the hospital, the receptionist at the urgent care sign-in booth asked me if I had been to China recently. Of course I hadn't, but I was recently in the middle of two different crowds of tens of thousands of people. In the waiting room, my brain oscillated between thinking of Kobe and thinking of how physically close to death I felt in the moment. Anyway, the doctor swabbed me to test for strep throat, which I never heard back about. They gave me a choice between taking a week of antibiotic pills and taking a single shot of penicillin in the butt. So I bent over and took the butt shot. Yes, I know you wanted B-roll of this more than literally anything I've ever mentioned on this channel, but 2020 Raymond wasn't as prolific at capturing potential B-roll, which is why this talking head section is so long. But needless to say, I now had a sore throat and a sore ass. But the pain was still an issue, and now it radiated throughout my inner ear. So later that same day after going home, I went back to the hospital, this time to the emergency room, because the urgent care center was closed. After what was probably an hour-long wait, typical emergency room stuff, the nurse practitioner brought me in, looked inside my mouth and my ears, and then told me that whatever I had looked like it was viral. Her solution to me dealing with the pain was to alternate between ibuprofen and acetaminophen, which to her credit made the pain bearable throughout the rest of the illness, though I still to this day never got an official diagnosis. Whatever it was came with a host of things I had never before experienced in an illness. First of all, it made my eyes more bloodshot than any illness I've ever had, which I actually filmed. Also, this illness lasted 2 full weeks when usually I got better after 7 to 10 days. And whatever this was caused pain in parts of my head I had never before experienced pain. Here is still kind of sick Raymond looped up on meds watching what he hoped would be the 49ers finishing their job from 2 weeks prior, but Patrick Mahomes said, "No, Raymond, San Francisco will not get a parade for you to vlog." After I recovered from my mystery illness and my team's crushing Super Bowl loss, February 2020 proceeded as normal in the life of Raymond and in the life of San Francisco. That is until the last day of February, which was Leap Day, a fitting name for a day foreshadowing the future.
One person with coronavirus in King County, Washington State, has died. This now makes the first coronavirus death confirmed in the U.S.
The Leap Day news seemed to cause the first wave of places planning potential shutdowns of a couple of days or a couple of weeks. Employees I talked to at businesses I frequented told me they might need to close for a couple of weeks. Then on Monday, March 16th.
The new public health order that we're announcing will require San Franciscans to remain at home with exceptions only for essential outings.
The Monday, March 16th announcement of the upcoming stay-at-home order triggered panic shopping at supermarkets across the Bay Area, including the North Point Center Safeway I often bought my groceries at. I did succeed in getting some food. Sorry to those who needed paper towels and toilet paper, or whatever meat was on these shelves. The stay-at-home order went into effect the following morning at 12:01 a.m. on Tuesday, March 17th, aka St. Patrick's Day. That morning, I headed out to the Embarcadero to drink in an atmosphere I had not experienced since moving to the city in 2015. The drastic decrease in activity on one of San Francisco's busy streets enabled me to finally notice almost every person, almost every car, and even the sounds. The rest of the day, I became hyper aware of what remained normal, like construction workers not skipping a beat and my favorite local Mexican food restaurant remaining open, even with some noticeable changes. All right, thank you. Thank you. That night, I headed back out to take in more of the unrecognizable atmosphere. Coit Tower's reminder that it's St. Patrick's Day would be one of those hyper-aware of remaining norms moments. But everything else didn't feel quite right. It was peaceful, but it was eerie. That guy out here running reminds me of the last wildebeest that ran through the gorge during that wildebeest scene of The Lion King. I love how eerily quiet and peaceful it is out here. Kudos to Chinatown Walgreens for stocking extra toilet paper and paper towels. Day 2 of the stay-at-home order wasn't eerie, but it was peaceful. It's as if this period of time enabled many San Francisco residents to finally spend time enjoying the city without crowds of tourists and temporarily without the responsibilities of school or work. By day 3 of the stay-at-home order, I developed a habit of taking advantage of the peaceful days. Of course, the reminders that those peaceful days came at a cost remained. It was around this time that my eating habits shifted from primarily grocery to primarily takeout due to supermarkets continuing to be wiped out, combined with the convenience of restaurants that were no longer bombarded by tourists. On March 20th, I went about my usual Friday business when I overheard a lady in Walgreens having a likely phone conversation that reminded me of these new times.
Somebody sneezed on the bus. Somebody sneezed on the bus phone. I said, bitch, I'll slap you. I had to apologize. No! And then you got the dumb motherfuckers that's uneducated talking about, oh, for 20, you live in Chinatown. Like, shut the fuck up. Donald Trump got people disrespecting everybody.
After Walgreens, I got an even harsher reminder. Yes, my beloved Golden Boy Pizza, the place that made all of my Fridays a little extra special. I was forced to search Little Italy for an alternative.
Obviously, one person is saying, look, I got my feelings about this, and I got these things you do. You may have heard about this now a lot.
Oh, great, thank you. While this new alternative wasn't Golden Boy Pizza, it wasn't bad either. It was good enough to be a substitute until my beloved Golden Boy returned. I didn't realize until reading that line that it sounded like I had a golden retriever run away or something. The rest of March 2020 was more of me taking my Canon 90D around town and soaking in the new norm as if to force myself to adapt to it. Of course, there was also likely a part of me determined to document everything because within my usual pessimistic soul, there was perhaps a hard-to-find optimistic bone that foresaw an eventual return to times that resembled the previous norm, which would give value to documenting that specific period of time. This is especially the case in a usually crowded and bustling cosmopolitan metro like San Francisco that serves as the cultural and financial center of one of the most populated regions in the most populated U.S. state. The latter half of March involved getting used to practically living on takeout as store shelves continued to be wiped clean, getting used to boarded up stores, some of which I swore were open just a few days earlier, getting used to staying in shape while gyms are closed, and getting used to not being able to access places I used to. April brought showers, briefly. April also brought nearly 2 months of what felt like peaceful spring insulated from the chaos of the rest of the world. The third of the month was supposed to be the San Francisco Giants home opener that is usually packed with nearly 40,000 hopeful fans, as well as potentially millions of additional fans tuning in. Instead, the absence of baseball brutally forced me to make the best of the nicest day of the year. 2 days after the nicest day of the year came the nicest evening of the year, a sublime golden hour at the usually tourist-packed Fisherman's Wharf. Even in normal times, San Francisco felt a bit like living in a bubble. The pandemic reinforced that feeling, but in its own unique way. While San Francisco's economy has long depended on tourism, the previous presence of tourists prevented me from seeing the city in its almost purest form. The previous presence of tourists also kept me from eateries I previously avoided due to crowds. Phase 1 of this period was peaceful while it lasted. Crowds began returning in late May, perhaps due to a combination of summer vacation and Phase 2 reopening announcements by local and state governments in mid-May. This marked the unofficial end of the peaceful spring. The crowd signaled an encouraging step toward the return to normalcy. However, a national news story signaled a discouraging step toward the return to normalcy.
And we must warn you, the images are disturbing.
For at least 3 minutes on the video, the man pleads for help, saying he couldn't breathe at least a dozen times.
I can't breathe.
Then he becomes unresponsive. Bystanders shout at the officers.
On the final day of May, George Floyd supporters gathered at Embarcadero Plaza and walked to the Civic Center. While the march was peaceful, it was disheartening to see some of the vandalism. Not just because I feel bad for the merchants and store owners who had nothing to do with the events causing civil unrest, but also because destroying property gave fodder to opponents of these and similar social movements to easily dismiss those social movements without having to engage in the difficult discussions about the root causes of civil unrest. That being said, it is also very important to note that the vandals may or may not in any way be affiliated with the specific protests the media attaches them to. I'm merely pointing out how the public may view those actions and exploit them to their political advantage, whether or not that's fair to the protesters. But I do believe in the importance of these peaceful gatherings because some forms of justice require collections of community efforts across the nation. Reports of vandalism and violence following the peaceful protest triggered a curfew announcement from the city for the first few days of June, which forced this usual nighttime runner to become one of those 5 a.m. runners, and I wasn't a huge fan of that. My June 2020 photo and video archive is lacking in files, likely because my job search was in full swing, though I did find time toward the end of that month to shoot the first video in the modern era of this channel. July and August were also somewhat uneventful, probably because I successfully landed a job for the first time since earning my master's degree in December 2019. In case some of you were wondering up to this point how 2020 Raymond had so much time on his hands. On the night of the 4th, I went on a somewhat unsuccessful brief hunt for fireworks. The lack of fireworks is understandable during a year in which large public gatherings are supposed to be kept to a minimum. It's just mildly annoying that the year just happened to have one of those few 4th of July nights in San Francisco that would have been clear enough to see fireworks. Some random July and August notes. I returned to the location of my old gym out of curiosity. I encountered a coyote during one of my runs. Yes, there are coyotes in San Francisco, and this one seemed to want no part of me. August 1st was the first time since pre-pandemic that I saw Embarcadero Plaza vendors. And apparently August 14th was the one day of that San Francisco summer that felt like a traditional California summer day. Unfortunately, California summer would soon leave a much bigger mark on the Bay Area.
The wildfires raging throughout the state.
That's right, more than 2.25 million acres burned in California this year already.
As a result of the numerous wildfires across the west coast of the U.S., this is what I woke up to on the morning of September 9th, 2020. This was the infamous Orange Skies Day. Man, my eyes are already watering. But the sky looks a lot more orange in person than it does through the viewfinder on this camera, so let's see how the images come out. Street lights in the middle of the afternoon. Seeing streetlights and building lights on at 3 p.m. was definitely an experience. If this were a novel about the year 2020, the raging fires and the resulting orange skies could serve as a climax that encapsulates the year through its symbolism. I don't know if my 2020 in San Francisco could be summed up by a single picture, but this could be a candidate. Speaking of candidates, 2020 was an election year. October began with a bit of a bang with the news involving the president testing positive. It also happened to be the month people mailed in their ballots to decide whether he got to stay or attempt to return 4 years later. One random October Saturday, I decided to head to the pumpkin patch to capture some images, but ran into this movie set near Ghirardelli Square. I didn't know this at the time, but apparently it was the final day of filming the San Francisco scenes for the MCU movie Shang-Chi. It's understandable that I didn't know this at the time, since up to that point I had never watched a single Marvel Cinematic Universe film. As for the pumpkin patch at Fort Mason, my now annual trip to these marks the unofficial beginning of the Raymond holiday season. The rest of the year was thankfully uneventful. These months I attempted to capture the festive atmosphere of the holidays as sort of a gauge for how the city and world were recovering and returning to life that was more familiar to everyone before 2020. In the opposite fashion of 366 days prior, I celebrated the upcoming year in the most Raymond way possible. Home, alone, and in peace.